Good morning, everyone, and greetings from Nature Kenya. It's quite a cold morning here in Nairobi. Let me welcome each and every one of you to our today's question and answer session, which we will be featuring more into reptiles and amphibians. And our speaker today is Steve Spawls. So I will request all the participants to register using their names for our registration purposes. And also to let you know that this session is recorded and we will be able to upload to our YouTube channel at the end of the presentation. And also we are live in our Nature Kenya Facebook page. So I request each and every one of you to raise your question through the chat box, and the speaker will be able to go through all of them after his short presentation. So far, we have received lots of questions in advance, which will also prioritize them for the speaker to be able to answer to them. So ladies and gentlemen, let's interact and let's learn from our nature expert today. So who is Steve Spawls? Steve Spawls was born in London, but moved to Kenya in 1957 when he was 4. He lived here in Kenya for 17 years in Meru and Nairobi, where he attended St. Mary's School. After taking a degree in geology, he worked in Ghana as British volunteer. Subsequently, he trained as a physics teacher and worked in Egypt, Botswana, and Ethiopia, spending nearly 40 years in Africa. Herpetology is his major interest. He got his first chameleon at the age of 6 and lost a finger to a pufferder when he was 17. His publications include field guides to East African and Ethiopian reptiles and amphibians, a guide to Africa's dangerous snakes, recently revised, and a book about his adventures in Kenya. At present, he lives in Norwich, UK, and lectures in science and mathematics at City College, Norwich. That is a brief bio about our speaker today. So ladies and gentlemen, my name is Richard Kipngeno. I am the Birding and Membership Officer here at Nature Kenya, and I will be moderating this session. Welcome all. And let me welcome our speaker today, Steve Spawls, on stage to take us through. Welcome, Steve.
Thank you very much, Richard, and thank you for that kind introduction. I hope you can all hear me, ladies and gentlemen. It's a great pleasure to be here with you. I'm going to start off, as Richard said, with a brief run through on reptiles and their sort of general characteristics and so on. And then we'll move to the questions and answer session. I've got a list of questions, but if you want to add any more, you're absolutely welcome. If you want to interrupt, I don't mind at all. If I'm going through and I'm talking about something and you want some more information, so please just do so. Let me enlarge my slideshow. Okay. Right. Okay. Right. Screen share. Pause. Resume share. Oh, we'll pause share from the beginning. Okay. So share. Now, Richard, when I go to resume share, it then stops. It pauses the screen share. If I put the slide up, let me put the slide up. Okay, and then it says your screen sharing is paused.
We can actually see it now. It's
can you all see it?
Yes, we can see it.
You can all see the screen. Oh, that's just great. Okay, right. Good. Okay. Right. So, ladies and gentlemen, brief stuff on reptiles and the reptiles in Kenya. As you know, reptiles are a diverse group, and I've got some pictures here of some typical reptiles of Kenya: crocodiles, tortoises and turtles, lizards, and snakes. There's a couple of other things, but we don't need to worry about them just at the minute. Some stuff about reptiles, what they are. They They are ectotherms. They get their heat from outside. They lie in the sun. They're not like us mammals, warm-blooded all the time. So they selectively move about to receive heat. Originally, they had 4 limbs, although, of course, they've now lost them. Snakes have lost them, okay? They lay eggs. There's, with a few odd exceptions, virtually no parental care. And reptiles, their body is covered with scales, okay? And they're a diverse group. It's sometimes easier to define reptiles in terms of what they don't have, which is fur, fins, feathers, wings, constantly warm blood, mammary glands, or larval stages. A little timeline of reptile evolution. In fact, this is tetrapod evolution, as you know, sort of more than 300 million years ago. Ancestral limbed animal moved onto the land, okay, and then diversified. You've got the mammals. Down below, this sort of clade down here basically are the reptile group. And as you can see, there's something a bit unusual in there. I mean, we've got tortoises and turtles and crocodiles, but also birds. Birds, this may be a bit disturbing. But yeah, sorry, Richie, yeah.
Yeah, unfortunately, seems the screen that we are seeing is only the introduction part.
Oh, have you not got the picture of the? Oh, screen sharing is paused. Hang on.
Actually, we can.
Right, so you're not actually seeing it, right? I beg your pardon. Hang on, what's going on here? So live. No, that's not what I want.
Yes.
So now you can see it, but you can't see the. Can you see the whole slide, or do you see the background stuff on the left as well?
Maybe you can just go to the slideshow so that we can see the bigger.
Yeah, from beginning. Well, let's go from current slide.
Yes.
Can you see that now? No, it says screen sharing is paused. Oh dear. Oops. Resume share. Okay, resume share from current slide. Can you see the evolutionary timeline slide?
Yes,
there?
we can actually see the evolutionary timeline.
Okay, you can see that.
Yeah, we can see that.
But it's still saying here your screen. Let me go back to resume share, new share. No, hang on. That's not what I want. Resume share. You know, for some reason, Richard, whenever I put it on to full screen, it says screen sharing is paused, and I don't know how to unpause it.
No problem. We can just use the current size because it's still visible.
All right, let's go on what we've got here then. Okay, I apologize for that, ladies and gentlemen. Okay, can you see that then? 2 interesting things about the class of reptiles.
Yes, we can see that.
Yeah, okay, this is just some historical stuff. 380 million years ago, a vertebrate crawled onto land. And once you go onto land, you've got certain constraints. You've got to overcome gravity. You've got to overcome the loss of water, dehydration. So tetrapods developed limbs and they developed a dry skin. Okay, and I mentioned here also about the birds. In fact, are a specialized subgroup of reptiles. Let's move on. So Kenya's got a very, very diverse reptile fauna. And my map here shows the number of species in various countries. In the UK, you've only got 3 species of snake. You move towards the equator, you get to Italy, 15, Egypt, 39, and then in Kenya, 130. The more tropical it is, the more reptiles you've got. Okay. Some statistics we've got. I mean, these may have changed. I mean, the numbers are changing all the time. As you ladies and gentlemen probably know, we discover new species within Kenya, and at the same time, certain species are split. You get one species is divided into two or more, but roughly at the minute, 130 species of snake in Kenya, 125 lizards, 17 turtles and tortoises, and one species of crocodile. Okay, a little bit of taxonomy and classification here. Reptiles are a class of organisms. Mammals are also a class. So are, for example, bony fishes and things like that. And the Testudines suborder of reptiles, the terrapins and tortoises. Then you've got the squamata, the scaled reptiles, and the squamata are divided into lizards and snakes. Okay. Orders and suborders are divided into families. So you've got the family Viperidae. The vipers, all dangerous. Bit of naming stuff here. Taxonomy, generic names. The puff adder has a scientific name, Bitis arietans. Bitis is the genus. It's a group of similar species. Arietans is the specific name. Similar animal in the same group, in the same genus, a rhinoceros viper, found in Western Kenya, Kakamega area, the rhinoceros viper with the horn on the end of the nose. Some characteristics of the different orders. Okay, crocodiles, 24 species of crocodile worldwide, big, dangerous reptile. Okay, and this is, you know, the one reptile that in Kenya might consider humanity as food. So crocodiles can be dangerous, as the Nile crocodile. Testudines, the tortoises, turtles, and terrapins. We got 5 land tortoises, 5 sea turtles, a soft-shelled turtle, and 6 freshwater terrapins. In fact, there's more species of terrapins now because one of their groups has been split. There's some classic examples. Let's move on. Chameleons vary a lot in their biology, or mate, they lay eggs. Okay, there's virtually no parental care. This big one here in the middle is the leatherback sea turtle, biggest turtle in the world. Let me just enlarge that briefly from current slide. Oh, whoopsie. Let me go back. Doesn't like that. Never mind. Okay. Chameleons eat a varied diet. Some of them are largely vegetarian, but some are omnivorous, and some of them are carnivorous to a small extent. You got the pancake tortoise here, rare tortoise of eastern Kenya in the Rocky Hills. Serrated hinged terrapins, hinged tortoises. Squamata, the scaled reptiles, lizards, 6,000 species worldwide, 125 species in Kenya. None of them are venomous. There's a lot, people often believe in parts of Kenya, some lizards are venomous or dangerous, but in fact, none of them are. There are venomous lizards. There's a couple of species several species, in fact, in Central America, but none in Africa. But nevertheless, people are still sometimes scared of lizards. But they don't do any harm, and they're useful. Okay. Mostly active by day, apart from the geckos, which are nocturnal. A few skinks live underground. This is our biggest lizard, the monitor lizard, the Nile monitor, Burukenge. It gets up to 2.5 meters. On the other hand, there's some very tiny ones. For example, the chevron-throated dwarf gecko down here. That's a baby. So vary in size. And unlike snakes, you know, snakes are completely asocial animals. They have no social life. When a little snake is born, it goes into the world. The only other snakes it sees, supposing it's a male, might be the occasional other snake that tries to eat it, or a female in the mating season. You know, males detect the scent of females, they follow them and they mate, but they're completely asocial. They don't live together, they don't have families. But lizards are different. There are several species of social lizard in Kenya, colonial lizards that live in colonies, in groups. The agamas being a classic example, the big agamas, where you've got a dominant male This is a male blue-headed triagama, and this is his female here. And he'll live in a colony, and he'll be in charge. He'll be sitting up on the tree with a few females around and a few babies. So lizards can be social, snakes are not. So the snakes, suborder Serpentes, or sometimes they're called Ophidia, 3,700 species, 130 species in Kenya, 10 families. Okay, all carnivores, swallow their prey whole, no ears, no eyes, no limbs, and they smell with their forked tongues. Reproduction, snakes, yeah, snakes mate, eggs are fertilized, there's no parental care. Snakes lay eggs somewhere warm and wet, they leave the eggs hatch out. Okay, there are a few snakes that give live birth. I mean, puff adder, for example, in Kenya, the vipers, the gaboon viper, the puff adder, rhinoceros viper, Kenya horn viper, they give live birth. And a few other things like the mole snake, which is in Kenya is a high altitude snake found in the sort of high central Rift Valley. But in fact, it's not true live birth. They're not like mammals where, you know, in mammals we have a placenta that links the mother and the baby and supplies nutrients. Snakes don't have placentas. What happens is even the ones that give live birth, the eggs just develop within the mother, and then they hatch out. Ecology, ecosystems, the way snakes are linked. Someone mentioned in a question, what role do reptiles play in our environment? They're part of the ecosystem. They're involved in food webs and food chains. Okay, I've got a food web here on the left. You can see the sand snake. The sand snake may be eaten by the mongoose. The agama may be eaten by the sand snake. The agama is eaten by the tawny eagle. Okay, you've got I've got a tawny eagle being eaten by a lion. Not very likely, although it does sometimes happen. But you see the interconnectedness, ladies and gentlemen. Snakes are part of ecosystems, and if you remove them from the ecosystem, the system can become lopsided. It doesn't cease to exist. I mean, you know, here in Britain, we used to have bears, we used to have wolves, we used to have lynxes, we used to have reindeer. They've all disappeared, you know, a long time ago. The ecosystem still exists, but it's different. Same thing in the suburbs of Nairobi. I mean, you've got snakes. I mean, you go Parklands, Lavington. Used to be puff adders there and spitting cobras and pythons and things like that. And in many places, those larger snakes have gone. The ecosystem still exists, but it's changed in structure. Some benefits of reptiles, you know, lizards eat mosquitoes, okay? They eat insect pests. Snakes eat rodents. There's a picture there of a house snake swallowing a striped grass mouse. You know, rodents destroy stored grain. If you have snakes around, then they kill rodents. So they're in a way protecting foodstuffs. Although, of course, in Kenya, it's a tough proposition to try and persuade farmers that they should leave snakes on their farms to keep the rats down. And their philosophy often is, you know, better to kill the snake in case it bites me or a member of my family. Anyway, snake venoms, a pharmaceutical resource. They contain many components which may have use in medicine in the future. They've already isolated drugs from snake venom that prevent bleeding, reduce pain, prevent clots, etc., etc. And of course, venom is also used to produce anti-venom, the antidote when you're bitten by a snake. Disadvantage of snakes: some species are venomous. The snake bite can kill, injure, or financially cripple you. So it's a hazardous business. I mean, there's a puff adder hidden in that picture there. I hope you can see it. It's not easy to see, but it's there. Gaboon viper, very big fangs. And here's the hideous consequences of a puff adder bite: tissue destruction. So, you know, a snake bite is a hazard. And I hate to say it, ladies and gentlemen, but by and large, humanity and dangerous snakes do not coexist well. So some tips for avoiding snake bites: sleep in a snake-proof house. Yes, easy to say, not always easy to do if you live in the countryside. Zip the tent, look where you're going, use a torch at night, wear strong shoes, treat snakes with respect, stay alert. you'll appreciate, ladies and gentlemen, for the rural poor, ordinary people living in the countryside. A lot of this stuff is just hideously impractical. It's all very well going out into the remote places in Turkana or Wajir or somewhere like that and start saying to the people, you must live in a closed house. I mean, it can't be done. But, if you can organize for people to have decent footwear, to use a torch at night, sleep on a bed rather than on the floor, all these things can make a difference. And, it's in some ways business of government to assist its citizens to avoid snake bite. Right, some of our common dangerous snakes: blackneck spitting cobra, ashes spitting cobra, rhombic night adder, black mamba, forest cobra, Egyptian cobra. If you think I'm going through these a bit quickly, ladies and gentlemen, don't worry. I mean, Richard tells me it's going to be available later to have a look at. You can look through the PowerPoint at your leisure. So large and dangerous snakes are incompatible with humanity. In an urban situation, they may need to be caught and relocated. And, for pythons to survive in a country like Kenya, we need the national parks, because the average citizen doesn't want a python around their house. I mean, here you see a green mamba in a house in Malindi up there under the Makuti thatch. And I mean, that's a hazard. Has to be removed. Has to be done by experts, people who know what they're doing. Brief stuff on the zoo geography of Kenya's reptile fauna. We've got a very varied fauna. We've got snake, and you see, you get a similar situation with birds, where the Kenya's bird fauna and mammals have come from different places in Africa. We've got snakes coming in from the west, snakes from the northeast, the Somali Maasai fauna, snakes along the southern coast, and also the endemic species, those that are, live only within Kenya. There's a nice handful of them. This top left-hand snake here is the green bush viper, only found in Kakamega Forest, Western Kenya. It's a snake of the great sort of Central African forest, just reaches Kenya. There's this Somali Maasai fauna example, the Kenya sand boa, basically comes into Kenya in the northeast. And the big mole snake, a southern African species, just gets into Kenya in the central Rift Valley, as far north as sort of Eldoret, but no further north. However, some of our reptiles in Kenya are found throughout sub-Saharan Africa. Egg eater, the Nile monitor lizard, the brown house snake, boomslang. All these reptiles occur basically throughout the savannas of Africa. But at the other end of the scale, we've got endemic species that only occur in Kenya. The Taita Hills bladehorn chameleon, known only from the Taita Hills. The Kenya montane viper, found only on the moorlands of the Aberdares of Mount Kenya. And here we have the Savo dwarf gecko, Lygodactylus savoensis, recently described by Dr. Patrick Malonza at the NMK, and known only from Savo. So a new addition to our fauna. A little bit of stuff on resources here, ladies and gentlemen. If you're looking for background stuff, I mean, we wrote a book some years ago. This book here, Field Guide to East African Reptiles, should be available in Kenya. I think the museum bookshop sometimes has it, the textbook center, and also in the book stop, which is the bookshop in the Yaya Center near Hurlingham. And they have a good selection actually of African books there. This is our website. If you're interested in information on the Kenya's dangerous snakes, Kenya Reptile Atlas. If you just type that in, www.kenyareptileatlas.com, you go to downloads. There are files there with all of Kenya's vipers, all of Kenya's elapid snakes, like the cobras and mambas, dangerous rear fang snakes like the boomslang, twig snake, and also the dangerous burrowing snakes. And you go there, there are free downloads for everyone. So feel free to go there, ladies and gentlemen. I mean, most of the pictures in there are mine. And if anyone wants to use them for any purposes at all, I give free permission. You're welcome to download stuff, use the pictures, use that stuff. You're absolutely welcome. Okay. It's also a famous website, the reptiledatabase.org. That's all the world's reptiles. And we have a Facebook forum, okay, East African herpetofauna or East African snakes and other reptiles. You go on Facebook. We're always happy there to answer questions, identify snakes, whatever. So some resources, ladies and gentlemen, for you to make use of, and physical resources within Kenya. Of course, you've got the National Museum, team of expert herpetologists, headed up by Dr. Patrick Malonza, that's him there. Okay, and there's a team, 5 herpetologists, all very, very good. You want to learn about frogs, go there and talk to Dr. Beryl Bwong or Victor Wasonga. Okay, so good resources available, ladies and gentlemen. Okay, I'll go back to the previous slide. I think that's probably it. And Richard, are we okay to sort of move on to the questions?
Thank you very much, Steve, for that insightful introduction to the Kenya's reptiles. So this opens a floor to all our audience. If you have any question, feel free to drop them in the chat box, and we will try to go through each of them. So maybe Steve, for now, we will prioritize the questions that we received early in advance through direct emails to us here in Nature Kenya, and also through our various social media platform, where our followers, our members really wanted to know a lot of information about these reptiles. And question number 1 was asking, and you've actually covered most of them during our
yeah. Yeah.
So somebody was asking, do reptiles have any role to play in our environment?
Yeah, well, yes, as you say, Richard, yes, thank you. We did cover it. Yeah, they are important. I mean, they're part of the big system. Now, I mean, if you go into central Nairobi, you know, go down there, down Kenyatta Avenue and so on, you're not going to see many reptiles. They're not part of that system. But on the other hand, if you're in Nairobi National Park or the Masai Mara, you are going, you know, reptiles are an important part of it. And these systems, you know, these big ecosystems, they are worth having. I mean, you can, as I mentioned earlier, you can exist without them. Here in Britain, for example, you know, all the megafauna has gone. But at the same time, the ecosystem still exists, but it's different. You know, as I say, in the suburbs of Nairobi, for example, you know, particularly places like Langata and Lavington and so on, where there's still a fair number of big trees, there's a good number of reptiles. They are important. And yeah, we can manage without them or manage without some of them. But it's, you know, it makes the system different. And as I said, they are beneficial. You know, the frogs in the rice fields are eating insects. Okay, the lizards in our house, the geckos in our house. I mean, people are afraid of geckos in their house. Sometimes they think they're going to defecate on them, and it will cause leprosy and things like that. It's not true. But lizards in our house eat insects. Snakes eat rats. So yeah, they are important.
Thank you very much for that response. Another question, why are reptiles considered cold-blooded?
Cold-blooded, yes, good question. We call them, the technical term we use is what we call ectotherms. And ectotherms means their heat comes from outside. And they're different to us. We're endotherms. Us mammals and birds are endotherms. Our blood is constantly warm. We are ready for action all the time, but it comes at a high cost. We've got to eat a lot of food, and a lot of that food is metabolized, makes us warm. Now, with reptiles, they get their heat from outside, okay? So they need to lie in the sun to get warm. If it's naturally warm, I mean, you take a place like Malindi or Mombasa, where it's very warm, there's quite a lot of nocturnal reptiles there, okay? Because at night, it is warm. But in a place like Nairobi, or let's say Limuru, or up on the Aberdares, where it's relatively cold at night, up on the Aberdares, there are reptiles. There's this endemic viper, there's several lizards, but they are never nocturnal because it's too cold and they need to get their heat from outside. So basically they're active by day, they lie in the sun. Big advantage of being an endotherm like that, your energy budgets are low. Okay, you get your heat from outside. So the energy you get from your food can be basically used for movement, for staying alive and stuff like that. But the big disadvantage is if it's really cold, then you're in trouble. I remember once, many years ago, I was driving from Nyeri up to Nanyuki. It was just in the early morning, about 7 degrees. and I saw a puff adder on the road, and I stopped and got out, and this puff adder was completely immobile. It had obviously been moving in the night, tried to cross the road, and you know, near Iucn, it gets very cold at dawn, drops to about 10 or 12 degrees. The puff adder just became unable to move. And luckily for that puff adder, it was me that came along, and I just moved him off the road. Whereas, I think an ordinary person would have seen the snake, thought, oh, a puff adder, I must kill it or something. So yeah, they get their heat from outside, and it's by selective movement. Warmth enters the skin. And for this reason, interestingly, you find, you consider us mammals, we've got a lot of fat under our skin, subcutaneous fat. Not only protects us against knocks and things like that, but it keeps the heat in. Snakes, by and large, don't have much fat under the skin. They do have fat. It's inside the body cavity, but they don't have it under the skin because it would prevent heat going in. Hope that makes sense.
Thank you, Steve.
Yeah, welcome.
There's another question here. Are there places in the world where reptiles are not found?
Yeah, just very cold ones. Antarctica, there aren't any. Inside the Arctic Circle, the North Pole, there's not many. In Kenya, the only place where there are no reptiles at all are above the vegetation line on Mount Kenya. If you go on Mount Kenya and you go up, up through the grasslands, when you start to climb up into the area where there's ice and snow and rock, there are no reptiles there. So yeah, basically very, very cold places. A few remote oceanic islands don't have reptiles, but most of them do. I mean, even there's a country like Ireland. Ireland has got no snakes, but it does have lizards. So yeah, just a few very, very cold places.
Okay, good to know. Now, are snakes poisonous or venomous? And what is the difference?
Very, very good question. In the old days, those two words meant the same, poisonous and venomous. It meant they had a poison or they had some venom. Okay. And one of the first books I ever bought back in 1960s was called Poisonous Snakes of the World. But in the last 15 or 20 years, toxicologists have decided, and I mean, this is purely semantics, ladies and gentlemen, it's a word thing. They decided that the word venomous means an animal that injects venom. For example, a snake or a wasp or a bee or something like that. And poisonous animals are those that are poisonous to eat, or they have sort of skin secretions which are poisonous if they, if you swallow them, something like that. So it's, yeah, venomous means, snake. So basically snakes are venomous. Okay, they inject poison when they bite, whereas some fish and some frogs are poisonous. In other words, if you ate them, you'd be poisoned. But I should emphasize, ladies and gentlemen, that's it's a bit of semantics. Sometimes people get very cross. If somebody sends a thing to our Facebook forum and said, I saw this poisonous snake, you can bet your life that within sort of 2 minutes, somebody will write in and say, it is not poisonous, it is venomous. But it doesn't really matter, especially for ordinary usage. But if you're going to write a scientific paper about it or something technical, probably best to say, yes, snakes are venomous. Okay.
Thank you for that clarification.
It's a pleasure.
Now, is it true that snakes smell with their tongues?
Yep, they do. Exactly right. They do smell with their tongue. If I go back to that picture we had earlier of the white-lipped snake, you can see bottom here on the right, snake's got a forked tongue, and yes, they pick up particles on the tongue, they touch it to an organ in the roof of their mouth called the Jacobson's organ. And that sends a message to the brain and basically tells them, that they're smelling. It tells them what the smell is. It interprets the message, the receptors. And a couple of interesting things come from that. One thing is that many snakes detect their prey by smell. And also they detect mates. When a female snake is ready to mate, she releases from glands under her chin a pheromone, a chemical which attracts males. And males detect the smell and they follow her and mate with her. And also snakes can smell their prey. And the interesting thing, I don't know if you can see in the picture here, is that the The tongue's got the two forks, and the difference in intensity of the smell on one side tells the snake what direction the source of the smell is coming from. You know, we have this, us humans, with our ears. When you hear a sound, you hear it in one ear before the other, and that tells us the direction of the sound. Okay, and this is also why, for example, and you probably noticed if you've ever been underwater, when you hear a sound underwater, because the speed of sound is much greater underwater, you can't tell what, you know, the sound arrives virtually simultaneously at your two ears, and you can't tell what direction the sound is coming from when you're underwater, whereas you can in the air. With snakes, their tongue tells them not only what they're smelling, it tells them whether there's a prey or a mate or danger or something like that, but it also tells them what direction it is. So, yep, they smell with their tongue.
Oh, thank you.
You're welcome.
Now, are all snakes venomous? How do you tell a venomous from a non-venomous one?
There isn't an easy way. Okay, there isn't an easy way. You've got to know them all. There are certain rules. For example, if we go back to the picture of some of the vipers. Let me find the puff adder. Picture of the puff adder here. You can see they're very fat. The vipers tend to be fat. They tend to have V shapes or geometric shapes on their back. Cobras they'll spread a hood and things like that. But you take a snake like the black mamba, for example, it's quite a nondescript looking snake. It doesn't look, you know, it doesn't look obviously dangerous or anything like that. So no, there's no easy way of telling them apart. In Kenya, of our 130 species, about 20 are very dangerous and have known to have killed people. And then there's another 20 or 30 or slightly more, which do have venom, but, you know, haven't killed people, or in fact, the venom is relatively weak. I mean, we got what are called rear fang snakes that have fangs at the back of the mouth. By and large, they are, you know, not dangerous. There are a few exceptions to that. For example, the boomslang, things like that. But yeah, most snakes are harmless. Having said that, sometimes the venomous ones, I mean, they may only be 10 or 20%, but sometimes they're most common. If you go to a town like Wajir, for example, the most common snake there is the Northeast African carpet viper, and that is a very dangerous snake. But they're not all venomous. There's no easy way to tell them apart, though. As I said, you've just got to know the different species. And one of the problems with the internet is you get this stuff circulating about, you know, how to identify a dangerous snake from a harmless one. And most of it is not applicable to Africa, and most of it is completely untrue. I mean, people say, you know, venomous snakes have got vertical pupils in their eyes, you know, but some do, but not all of them do. And there are harmless snakes that have vertical pupils. So yeah, you've got to know them all, and this is something that's worth knowing. And you know, going back to my information sheet, what do you call it? If you go to our website, Kenya Reptile Atlas, you'll find pictures there of all of Kenya's dangerous snakes. It's worth downloading those files and getting to know them. Hope that makes sense.
Thank you for that clarification. Now, the next question is a much broader one, and I think this is really of much interest. And I will combine it to the question that just came in through our Facebook page, and it's about snake farming. One of the presidential aspirants has claimed that if elected, he will push for the establishment of snake farms as a livelihood activity for Kenyans. Steve, is this a viable idea, and can snakes really be a source of income?
Yeah, I saw that. Professor George and his interesting ideas. Yeah, there could be a modest income to be made from snake farming in a way, but it needs regulation, and it's not going to make people very, very rich. And let me tell you what sort of demand there is. There is demand in the West, in the pet trade, for certain snakes, certain particularly desirable animals, things like certain small vipers, the Kenya sand boa, geckos, chameleons in particular. And I mean, for a long time in Tanzania, they've had a active trade there, selling reptiles to the pet trade. And, you know, I would never say you can't do it, because to some, you know, rural Kenyans, this is a possible source of income. And, you know, as we know, life in rural areas is often tough. Give people an opportunity to make some money from it. It's a good thing, but it does need regulation. However, it's a difficult business. I mean, the profits are not large. Other possibility is the production of venom, okay, for making anti-venom. But again, it's, you know, there's not big money to be made. I mean, there are a number of very good venom producers in South Africa, but the complications involved in obtaining sterile venom and then getting them to a pharmaceutical manufacturer means that you've got to have a high-tech laboratory, you've got to have good logistics, and you know, the money that you get is not very great. I mean, at the minute, pharmaceutical companies worldwide are cutting back on the production of anti-venom. That's a terrible thing. To expand on that later, but basically, you know, there's not a lot of money. Now, there is another possibility. You get reptiles, you kill them, you sell their meat, you sell their skins for leather. Now, there is demand for snake meat and leather, particularly in the Far East, China. But the logistics of it, you know, are complicated. So, I mean, I think in some ways this is, you know, it is possible, and I'm not going to say, you know, the rural poor shouldn't be denied the opportunity to harvest snakes and things like that. But the logistics are very difficult. The market is not great. And basically it was something that does need to be regulated. Now, I mean, fortunately in Kenya, we do have good regulatory authorities, you know, Ministry of Natural Resources and the KWS and things like that. They are active and they do police things like that. So it is possible, but it's not going to make a lot of people rich. I mean, my impression is that the professor is seeking to sort of make people happy and say, you know, these are great ideas and I'll put them into place and you should vote for me, and fair enough. But at the same time, you know, I don't think harvesting reptiles and snakes and things like that is going to make anyone very rich. It's not going to make huge numbers of people rich.
Thank you very much for that insight, Steve. Yeah, that was clear enough. And still dwelling on that, Gary Combo from our Facebook page was asking, is it possible to pet East African reptiles, and which one will be child-friendly?
Is it possible to what, sorry?
To pet, to keep
keep them as pets. Oh yes, you can. I mean, in some ways this is a great way to sort of, it's how I got interested. I mean, I was a child in Meru. I started keeping frogs, I started keeping chameleons and things like that. Any lizard can be kept. I mean, I would avoid the sort of big monitor lizards, you know, the brukenge, because they basically can bite and claw and things like that. But you know, you can keep pets. Frogs can be kept, lizards can be kept, harmless snakes can be kept. Although you need to be very careful that the snake is harmless. You know, you don't want to keep a puff adder as a pet. But yeah, I mean, I say things like the brown house snake, the Battersby's green snake, Kenya sand boa, they do make good pets. But as you're probably aware, I mean, they're not like cats and dogs where you can actually get some affection and develop a relationship. You don't get any affection from reptiles. But, you know, I mean, they can get used to you. They can get used to handling. It's nice to keep them. But keeping a pet reptile is, you know, I think is a good thing. It puts children in contact with the wants of living things, you know. And I mean, if you live in Nairobi or Nyeri or something, you decide to keep a pet snake. Of course, your neighbours may be wary about it. That's one of the risks, you know. But if you keep a pet snake and then if it's not doing so well, you can then just let it go. So yeah, I'm in favour of keeping reptiles as pets, but not dangerous ones.
Thank you very much for that.
Okay.
Again, Steve, there has been a lot of suggested snake bite remedies, including washing the bite area with milk or urine, sucking the venom out, using the black stone to suck out the venom, among others. Do any of these remedies really work? In case of snake bite, what should one do?
I hate to say it, Richard, but none of them really work. When you consider when a venomous snake bites, it injects under your skin, and often quite deep, a cocktail of very, very toxic chemicals. If you've received a large dose, a lethal dose, the only thing that's going to save you is treatment in an advanced hospital with, or a good clinic with anti-venom. Washing the wound is not a good idea. I mean, you might wipe it off gently, but any movement or rubbing of the wound site is liable to cause the venom to move more quickly into your bloodstream. When you have an injection, and after the doctor's given you the injection, she'll often rub the site, okay? And this is to speed up the dispersal of whatever was injected into your bloodstream. So if you start rubbing a snake bite, you're going to cause the venom to move in more quickly. So it's not a good idea. So washing, that sort of stuff, urine, milk, they don't do any good at all. That venom has been injected into your bloodstream. The only way to treat it is to get a chemical into the bloodstream, anti-venom, which is going to circulate, meet the venom, and neutralize it. Having said that, things like the black stone, they do serve a purpose in that, it calms people down. When somebody's bitten by a snake, they start thinking they're going to die, and they get terrified, and their heart starts to race and things like that. If you can anything that can calm them down is good. It slows the circulation, means the venom's taken up less rapidly. So I know hospitals where when a snake bite victim arrives, the doctor goes to see the victim, and the first thing she or he says to them is, all right, look, just calm down. I'm going to put a black stone on. And they get a black stone and they strap it to the bite with a little bit of elastoplast, a sticking plaster. It doesn't actually do any good, but it has the effect of calming the patient down. I think, oh, this thing's going to suck the venom out. So it makes them more relaxed. So then the doctor can look for symptoms which are not brought on by fear. But yeah, I mean, in the end, if you've been bitten by a snake and it's injected a lethal load of venom, then you're going to have anti-venom. So you're bitten by a snake, what are you going to do? You need to get to hospital. And that's all there is to it. If someone's bitten by a snake, especially in a remote area, just stop whatever you're doing and organize transport to the nearest clinic or hospital as quickly as possible. I mean, in Kenya, the larger hospitals, by and large, do have anti-venom. Okay, so you're going to need to get there. With a few odd exceptions, by and large, snake bites don't kill that quickly. You've got, hours or maybe even days. As I said, there are exceptions. If you're bitten by a black mamba, you can be in trouble in a couple of hours. So you need to take very swift action. But bites by things like puff adders, burrowing asps, spitting cobras, and things like that, you get to hospital as quickly as possible. Don't start trying local treatment. Having said that, I mean, very often people in Kenya, they're bitten by a snake. They'll go and find a local healer. I hate to say it, it's a waste of time, unless the healer reassures them. But, everyone involved in sort of folk medicine and that sort of thing should know that if they get a snake bite victim, don't start carrying out rituals. Tell them, get to hospital quickly.
Thank you very much for that. And still dwelling on the snakes, they are known to all but feared by many. Someone here is asking, can one overcome the fear of snakes?
Oh, it's difficult sometimes. It's very difficult. The easiest thing to do is to start with children, and introduce children to harmless snakes and get them used to the idea. So I mean, this is why I said if you keep snakes, it's a good thing, and you show them to your neighbors, show them to your friends, you overcome their fear. Familiarity, you can overcome it, but you've got to work at it, and some people never do. And there are some people that remain scared of snakes all their lives. Well, I've known people who, people who are scared of irrational things. I knew a lady who was scared of butterflies, and I mean, it was a phobia. She couldn't overcome it. She knew they weren't dangerous. It's the same thing happens with snakes sometimes. Education is the way forward, I think. I mean, if there was a couple of lessons in every school in Kenya, in primary school, about how useful snakes are, and someone was able to show a snake or two, it works. But it's hard to overcome it. Some people never do. And people. I mean, the thing is also in Kenya, people's fear of snakes is very different to the people's fear of snakes in Britain. In Kenya, it is entirely pragmatic, because snakes, especially for a rural dweller, represent something that can kill you. And someone sees a cobra outside the house in the morning, they don't think, oh, that's beautiful. They think, that thing could kill me, it could kill my children, so it's better if I kill it. In Britain, we virtually never see a snake, and yet people are still afraid of snakes. I mean, some people have hysterics if they see a snake on the television. Okay, but in East Africa, basically in most of the tropical world, people's fear of snakes is entirely pragmatic. It's something dangerous. Okay, and yes, you can overcome it. Some people don't have it. Most of us do, though. Most people are instinctively afraid of snakes. I mean, when I was a child, I remember being frightened of snakes, but you can overcome it. But it needs work, and some people, they never manage it. I always say, you're afraid of snakes, go to the snake park, have a look at the snakes there, and, try and admire their beauty. And that, maybe think about tolerating snakes in your garden rather than just whacking them.
Thank you for that. From our Facebook page, I see Douglas Hart is asking, Steve, what about the availability of anti-venom in the country?
That's a complicated story. At one time, the Kenyan hospitals used to import anti-venom from Germany, from a firm called Behringwerke. Then they stopped making anti-venom. But for a while, Kenya was importing small quantities from South Africa. But I think nowadays, I don't know the full situation. They were getting anti-venom from India, and it was of very variable quality. And I mean, on our Facebook page, people often say, look, I went to hospital in Baringa, or I went to hospital in Mombasa, and sometimes they have anti-venom and sometimes they don't. The trouble with anti-venom, particularly the South African stuff, which is very high quality but very expensive, is that for many hospitals, it's a drug that's not worth having because it is needed so infrequently. And when you imagine if you're a treasurer at the hospital somewhere like Kisumu, you've got a few $1,000s to spend. You could buy treatment for 2 mamba bites, or you could buy treatment which will treat 2,000 malaria victims. It's, as we say, it's a no-brainer. The treasurer at the hospital say, look, better to get the anti-malarials rather than the anti-venom, because the anti-venom is hideously expensive. And I mean, you might, in the hospital in Kisumu, you might put that anti-venom in the fridge, and then you never need it because snake bite's erratic. One year you might get 3 bites, another year you might get none, or all the bites you get are treatable without anti-venom. It is available. It's available on a sort of on irregular basis. It depends, I think, to many ways on the individual hospitals, whether they choose to order it and whether they've got a budget for it. It is expensive. It's very expensive to make. I think in Nairobi Hospital, Kenyatta Hospital, some of the Aga Khan places like that, they do have anti-venom. And there's also, I understand, some private doctors in Nairobi who also have stocks of it, but it is available erratically. And this is the trouble. I mean, the pharmaceutical companies don't produce a lot. And you can see why. I mean, to produce a drug which is needed on an erratic basis by extremely poor people, there's, pharmacy is driven, I hate to say it, by profits. It's not, often it's not worth it. Better to make a drug that everybody needs, than to make something like anti-venom. So I'm afraid the supply of anti-venom is erratic. If you're working with snakes or you're worried about snake bite, my advice would be go to your nearest hospital and check whether they've got anti-venom. And if they don't, think about whether you want to carry on working with snakes and whether your insurance is good.
Thank you very much for that, Steve.
You're welcome.
Back in rural areas, there are beliefs that some snakes have rare claws that helps grip on a prey, or even have 2 heads at each end. Is this true?
No, it's not true. But there are, for example, the blind snakes have got very blunt tails. These are little burrowing snakes, and the tail looks like a head. And consequently, people think they've got two heads, particularly since these snakes can go backwards and forwards. But no, it's not true. They've got one head and one tail. I mean, they're basically, you know, what do I call it? Sort of normal vertebrate animals organized in the usual fashion, you know, with their head at the front and the tail at the back.
Okay, great. Do crocodiles have tongues?
Their tongue? No, they don't, funnily enough. Crocodiles don't have tongues. They have a palate. They can sort of close the back of the mouth, but they don't have a tongue.
Nice. And how is the distribution of venomous snakes in Kenya?
Virtually throughout the country, but the lower the altitude, the more there are. I mean, for example, you consider a town like Limuru. I mean, there's only one venomous snake up there, the East African garter snake, and some occasionally spitting cobras. Town like Nairobi, or say a city like Nairobi, we've got 5 species of dangerous snake. Around Nairobi, you've got the Egyptian cobra, puff adder, black-necked spitting cobra, night adder, and garter snake. You go to a town like Watamu, I mean, there's about 15 species of very dangerous snake. So the lower the altitude, the more species there are. You know, so in Kenya, the places with a lot of dangerous snakes, basically the coast and the low altitude country, there are fewer at high altitude, but almost everywhere in Kenya, you can find at least one venomous snake.
Another question here, do chameleons really change their color?
Oh yes, yeah, they change according to, to some extent, they fit in with their background. You know, a chameleon resting in a tree tends to assume the color of the leaves, but they do change. When they're angry, they go black. When they're trying to warm up, they go black, because, you know, black is a good absorber of of radiant heat. And when they're sleeping at night, they go sort of pale green. So yeah, they change. And although it's more to do with their sort of temperament than their, you know, than their surroundings, they usually are fairly well camouflaged. I'm just going to just skimming through the pictures here. You see this chameleon down here on the bottom left. I mean, he's a sort of pale green. That's the color they go at night. So yeah, they do change. And as I said, it often matches their background, but is to some extent their temperament, and also how hot or cold they are, you know. So they'll change color according to the temperature, to the environment, and the and how they're feeling.
Okay. So how do geckos manage to clinging onto walls and ceilings? Do they have sticky feet?
Yeah, good question. On the gecko's feet, on the pads on the bottom of their feet, they've got many tiny little little claws, little sort of sorry, not claws, are hooks, little tiny hooks, and these hooks basically catch on irregularities. So although a surface like glass, for example, or a wall may seem very smooth, at the microscopic level, these basically it has irregularities. When the gecko puts its foot flat onto the surface, these tiny hooks on the bottom of their feet, they're called setae, and they basically cling to the irregularities, and they hold on with them. So yeah, they do have tiny little hooks. It's not a suction thing. It's not like a suction pad or something involved with air pressure. They're just little very microscopic hooks that cling to the surface. And when the gecko wants to move, it just pulls them away. It's like, you know, Velcro, when you pull Velcro apart. The little hooks, they work just like that.
Thank you. And is it true that tortoise can live up to 100 years?
Yeah, it is true. There are tortoises. There's a giant tortoise in the Seychelles, one of those really big Indian Ocean ones, that has lived more than 100 years. They are long lived. I mean, they live to 60, 70 years often, especially the big ones, leopard tortoises and things like that. So yeah, they are long lived. I mean, one has been known to live more than 100 years. I can't remember what the maximum age is, but definitely more than 100. And this has led to a sort of weird superstition in places. You know, in China, people eat tortoises, and they believe that because if you eat the meat of an animal that lives to a very great age, you yourself will also live to a very great age. I mean, it's just excuse my French, it's just a superstition. Okay, it's not true. But yeah, people believe that. They believe if you eat a tortoise because it lives very long, you're going to live very long. They do. They are long-lived, though. I mean, the age that reptiles live to is not well known because mostly they've been studied in captivity, and in captivity, the situation is artificial. And you, ladies and gentlemen, probably know the story about the study of lions. Initially, lions were studied in captivity. And there was a man doing research on lions in a zoo in Ireland, and he found they lived more than 30 years. And he concluded that they probably lived that long in the wild. And then a researcher called George Schaller was working in the Serengeti. And he found that in the Serengeti, the lions rarely lived longer than 8 or 10 years. Because when they got to that age, they just got a little bit slow. And then they couldn't catch any prey, or they get an injury, and then they died. So studies on captive reptiles, the figures that we've got may or may not be accurate, but there was a cobra that lived in a zoo for 30 years. Some of the bigger lizards have lived nearly that long. And yeah, tortoises are the most long-lived.
Okay, thank you. We have summarized the questions that we received early in advance, though there will be a last one that we'll be closing the chapter with. So before we go to the chat box, there is also another question that have just come in through our Facebook page from Anthony Childs. And he's saying that I have received an online video today of someone claiming that those snakes were brought to Kenya. They were introduced. Can you clarify that?
Yeah, I saw that story. Yes, that's right. No, it's not true. I mean, I saw a man saying, "Oh, the Mzungus introduced a lot of snakes when they were building the railway or something like that." No, it's not true. There are a few introduced animals in Kenya. I mean, there are geckos which came on the sort of on the boat trade on dhows and ships and things like that, and they're introduced on the coast. And there's a little blind snake which has been introduced on the coast. But no, there are no other introduced snakes in Kenya. I mean, you know, you can you can check in the museum collection. You go to the National Museum, have a look at the specimens they've got there, and basically there aren't any external snakes. I mean, it's a legend. I don't know where it came from that, you know, snakes were introduced in large quantities to Kenya, but no, it's not true.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that clarification. To our chat box, the first question, okay, I see Robin James is happy about the pronunciation that we just made. Okay, Richard Ngugi is asking, how do snakes remove waste from their bodies?
Yeah, same way as other vertebrates, but with slight modifications. For example, in order to conserve water, they basically, instead of producing liquid urine, their kidneys concentrate the nitrogenous waste into a paste. Okay, fecal matter is just, you know, basically passed out the way it happens with everyone. The stuff that we haven't actually digested, you know, the digestive system breaks down the useful nutrients into very small quantities and into you know, molecular size, and then the body absorbs it. Okay, things that don't get digested. And with snakes, it can be sort of things like, for example, the snake's digestive system is pretty powerful. Sometimes things like the hooves of antelope don't get digested, or some of the hair, or things like that, and that just gets passed out of the body as normal fecal matter. And as I said, the urine, you know, the excretion via the kidneys produces a paste rather than liquid. So snakes don't exactly urinate; they produce a white paste.
Thank you very much for that answer. There's another question from Myth Arts. And the question is, hi there. I have a question that might be a bit more advanced. I used to think that snakes are viviparous, giving live birth, and others oviparous, egg laying. Recently, someone told me that snakes are actually not viviparous, as true viviparity is when the mother provides nourishment to the fetus with an umbilical cord. Could you
Yeah.
share some light on this? Thanks.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. Us mammals are the only group of animals where we nurture the baby that grows within us, and we actually provide nutrient direct to the baby from the mother. And I mean, you ladies and gentlemen probably remember the biological advantage of that. The baby's within the mother, it's being nurtured. If danger threatens, she can run away. The baby's within her. And then when we give birth to our babies, we then feed them with milk, which means that the mother doesn't have to leave the baby. Okay, so these are evolutionary major advantages for us mammals. But where snakes are concerned, no, it's absolutely right. The egg is, you know, the gametes meet, the egg gets fertilized, it then produces a shell, and then the egg is laid. All the nutrients that are necessary, apart from water and oxygen, are already in the shell. The snakes that give live birth, as your correspondent mentioned, that's exactly it. They don't, no nutrient passes from the mother to the little snake in the egg, but the egg develops within the mother. This is done in vipers and also in snakes by and large that live at high altitude. For example, you take a snake like the mole snake, which in Kenya basically lives in the Central Rift Valley. When the mother's expecting, the eggs are developing within her. She basks in the sun, and this speeds up the development of the baby. But yes, it's right. They're all egg laying, but some of them retain the eggs within the body until basically they're just about to hatch, and then they give birth.
Thank you for that clarity. As Stephen Gitenya is asking, many thanks for your presentation, Stephen. How sharp is a snake's eyesight?
Oh, good question. By and large, not very good. They see moving objects. There are a few exceptions. For example, the boomslang, which you get in Kenya, and the twig snake, they've got binocular vision. They've got a groove in front of their eyes. Their pupils are elongate at the front. They can see things in front of them, and they can see non-moving things. A boomslang can spot a chameleon in a tree, even if the chameleon isn't moving. But in general, their eyesight is poor. They don't seem to be able to see in color. I think some can, but most of them can't. And also, they see moving things. And you sometimes notice this. I mean, sometimes I've been trying to catch a snake and I've been standing near it. And if you stand still, the snake will pass quite close to you without trying to bite you. It doesn't realize that you're there until you move. So no, they've got poor eyesight. And some snakes have got very poor eyesight. I mean, the little blind snakes that live underground, their eyes can only tell the difference between light and dark. They don't really use them. And snakes that hunt at night, for example, house snake and things like that, wolf snake, they smell their prey. Their eyesight is poor. If you stand still, if you're near a snake, suppose you're walking in out in wild country somewhere and you suddenly see a snake, if you stand still, the snake quite quickly forgets that you're there. And in fact, it's not going to see you if you remain motionless. They do say if you see a snake approaching, stand still. It'll just go by. They don't attack you. So yeah, poor eyesight.
Okay, that's good. I just hope that we'll have the courage to stand still when you see a snake.
It's like saying stand still when a lion comes near you, isn't it? You know, it doesn't work that much.
Or lie down when a buffalo is chasing you.
Yeah, that's all right, yeah. Practical advice, but difficult to put into practice. Yeah.
There's a question from Samira. I'm happy that eventually Samira managed to come on board. Are you offering courses on reptiles and amphibians?
I don't offer any at the minute. I mean, I live in UK. I live in Norwich. So apart from online stuff like this, I mean, I hope maybe someday in the future we'll offer some courses. And in fact, of course, the NMK offer a herpetological course a couple of times a year, and so do the people at down at the coast at Watamu, what used to be Iucn and are now called East African Reptiles. They do courses. I think they do handling courses. NMK occasionally, and I mean maybe sometime in the future when I retire, we could run some courses in Kenya. But at the minute, the only stuff I offer is online stuff. But as I always say, ladies and gentlemen, I mean, you know, please use our website, use the let me scroll through it again. The Kenya Reptile Atlas and the Facebook forum. And if you can afford it, I mean, I know this book is a little bit expensive. I think it's about 3,000 or 4,000 shillings, so it's not cheap. But you know, they're worth getting. But the stuff on the Kenya Reptile Atlas is free. Okay. And there's a lot of good stuff on the internet. You do need to look sharp occasionally with stuff on the internet because, you know, it's unregulated, as you ladies and gentlemen know. And there's stuff out there which is nonsense, but there is some good stuff. So yeah, but yeah, if you talk to the team at the NMK, contact, you know, Dr. Patrick Malonza or one of his team. I mean, they basically do run courses from time to time. But Nature Kenya, you do some stuff as well, don't you?
Yes, actually, we will liaise with Samira when our next herpetology course comes up about the same, because we normally organize it.
Yeah, well, I'm happy to be involved remotely, you know, and if you need material, you're always welcome to use it. And as I also say, I mean, occasionally I'm in Kenya, maybe we can coordinate something. But yeah, and as I said, if you go to the Kenya Reptile Atlas, you'll find maps, you'll find pictures, you'll find text, all Kenya's dangerous snakes. And as I said, you know, not all the pictures are mine, but any picture that's marked as mine, I'm basically willing for anyone to use it for any purposes. You're all absolutely welcome.
Thank you very much for that. And also for about the book, the field guide to East African reptiles, you also have in our Nature Kenya shop here. So,
oh, do you? Oh, good.
Yeah, we have. And Rupi Mangat is asked, okay, so great to see you again, Steve. One day I want to do a snake safari with you.
Yeah, Rupi and I are hoping one day to do a snake safari. Yeah.
Yes, and yeah, and she's also asking, all the snakes at home are being killed, and the house helps think, okay, okay, maybe I should keep a harmless snake as a pet. Any ideas where I can get one or two? And do I need a license?
I understand if you do want to keep pet snakes, especially you want to keep numbers, you need a permit from KWS. I think they do give them. If you talk to KWS administration, they should be able to provide you with one. They usually, you know, under the proviso that you treat it humanely and stuff like that. Getting hold of one, well, if you don't want to catch one yourself, there are various people you could talk to. I don't think the museum and the snake park actually sell them, but there are some. If you talk to the people at Iucn, I think they may be able to, or East African Reptiles as they are now, they might be able to point you towards some individuals who have snakes and you know have got permission to pass them on. So yeah, I mean guys like Kyle Ray and Anthony Childs and so on, they would be able to help you with something like that. The crucial thing is, if you're going to keep a pet snake, just do make sure it's a harmless one. I mean, I have a famous story which you ladies and gentlemen have probably heard before, but there was a time when I was helping at Nairobi Snake Park. This is in the 1960s, and a man who was leaving Kenya to go to live somewhere else called us up and said, "Will we like his pet python?" And so we said, "Oh yes, we'd like to have it go on display." And he said, "I'll bring it down." And he brought down this sack and he said, "The python's in here." And he tipped it out into a cage and it was a puff adder. And it was a big puff adder. And the snake park curator, James Ash, looked at him and he said, "Have you had this pet python very long?" And the guy said, "Oh, yes." And James said to him, "Has it ever tried to bite you?" And he said, "Oh, sometimes, but you know, I moved quickly out of the way." Anyway, when this man went off, I said to James, "Why didn't you tell him it was a puff adder instead of a python?" And James said, "You saw how old he was. He'd have had a heart attack."
That's great. So shifting gears from snakes now to turtles, and then we will revisit them again. There is a question that has come from Douglas Hart through our Facebook page. And he's saying hawksbill turtle is listed on the IUCN red list as critically endangered. What can be done to protect them?
Yeah, well, now it's a bit of a complicated procedure, basically. You need to put stuff on the IUCN red list to classify them as endangered and things like that. Firstly, you need to know where they live. and get some idea about what sort of numbers. And then you have to try and quantify, are there threats to them and things like that? And if there are threats, what are those threats? Now, I mean, in Kenya, we do have a network of protected areas, basically. And many species do occur within those protected areas. But yeah, it's got to be done sort of fairly formally. And I mean, you know, in Kenya, although officially, I mean, regulations are you're not supposed to sort of kill wild animals. People do, particularly with snakes, because they represent a danger, and you can't prosecute people for doing things like that.
Thank you. Still on Facebook page, there is a comment from Lynn. Okay, yeah, she's still referring to the poor eyesight of snakes, but she's saying that regardless, I'll turn like crazy if I spot a snake.
I what? Sorry?
Oh, it's just a comment from Lynn through our Facebook page that, well, even if the snakes have poor eyesight, regardless, she will turn like crazy if she spots a snake.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. I mean, many people would say, you know, when you see a snake, the best thing is just to run away. I mean, the thing is, of course, if you make a sudden movement, that may scare the snake. I mean, occasionally you're walking in a wild place, you find a snake is very close to you. If you sort of lash out at it or try and hit it or something, you're asking to get bitten. But it's, you know, it's hard not to panic. I mean, I have seen people, you know, get really, really scared when they suddenly see a snake. And of course, when you get frightened, you know, when you're stressed, you don't know what you're going to do. And it's easy to say, yeah, look, you don't stand still, wait till the snake moves away or move backwards slowly. That's the best thing to do, basically. If you can, if you bump into a snake, just pause and then move backwards slowly. But, you know, it's the flight or fight instinct takes over.
There's a question here from Jeremy through our chat box. Is it true that lizards drop their tails to evade predation, then regenerate it?
Yep, that's absolutely true. Not all of them do, but quite a lot of them do. Yeah, if a predator gets hold of the tail snaps off. It breaks very easily when the joints in the spinal column of a snake's tail, the vertebrae, are very loosely interlinked, and they break very easily. So the predator lunges at the lizard, gets hold of the tail breaks off. The snake gets a meal, or the bird of prey as it may be, and the lizard runs away, and the tail then grows back. Having said that, there are a few lizards where the tail doesn't break. For example, chameleons, monitor lizards, and with agamas, those brightly colored lizards, the tail doesn't break very easily. But yeah, that's right. They lose a tail and they escape, and then the tail regrows. And the regenerated tail usually looks different to the original.
Thank you. From Benson Muya, excellent presentation here. But Steve, does it mean a snake won't smell you if you stand still?
Yeah, that's right. Well, it's a good point. They may smell you, but you don't smell dangerous to them, you know, so they'll just stay still or move away. No snakes eat humans. We're too big. We're not the right shape. So by and large, if a snake may smell you, but it doesn't react. I mean, you take a snake, for example, especially a snake living in suburbia. Suppose you're a spitting cobra living in somewhere like Parklands, okay? And Ruiru or Thika, you're moving around at night. You probably quite often smell humans, but it doesn't worry you, okay? So yeah, they're not antagonistic towards the smell of humans. Having said that, I mean, there's something I should point out. There've been a few bite cases in South Africa from a snake called the Mozambique spitting cobra, and there's one or two in Kenya from the red spitting cobra where the snake has apparently entered a building and bitten the sleeping person, and no one knows why, because they can't eat them. You know, I mean, we're too big to be any use to cobras, and yet the snake is somehow prompted to bite the sleeping person. And some people have suggested it may be that we produce a smell that the snake associates with prey. Now, I mean, those cobras, you know, the red spitting cobras and the Mozambique spitting cobras, although they mostly eat amphibians, they do eat mammals as well. So there've been one or two cases, but that's just where somebody's been sleeping and the snake has bitten them. It doesn't happen very much. By and large, you know, snake smells a human, doesn't mean anything to them. They're not going to attack.
Okay, thank you. From Steven Githenya, Asante Sana, Stephen Spawls, you offer good expertise in herpetology.
That's very kind of them.
With him. From Samira, thank you so much for the info on resources. Well, there are a couple of questions from Peter and Jeru. One, do snakes migrate from one location to another in different seasons, just like birds do?
Yeah, to a very small extent. They don't go big distances, as you'll appreciate. Snakes move small distances. But occasionally, for example, green snakes, Philothamnus, like for example, Battersby's green snake, which in Highland Kenya we call muraru. And I mean, those snakes in the wet season will move away from the waterside. They will move into more open country because they're looking for frogs. And in fact, frogs are more widespread. But then they'll move back near the waterside in the dry season. And I mean, I have, you know, in for example, in the United States, rattlesnakes move a long way across country. And then in the winter, they move back to the place where they hibernate. You see the same here in Britain, actually, the common adder. They hibernate in dens, you know, in dry places underground. And when the spring comes, they leave the den and they move away. So yes, they do migrate, but not any great distances.
Okay, his question number 2. The government takes so long to compensate victims of snake bites in the arid and semi-arid parts of this country. How does this impact on the conservation of snakes and communities' attitudes towards snakes?
Well, you know, Richard, the attitude of the average person in the community towards snakes. They just think, God, that's something dangerous. I better just kill it. I mean, snakes are secretive. They stay out of your way. I mean, you go to a place like Wajir or Baringo and so on. There's quite a lot of dangerous little snake called the carpet viper, and people kill them. I mean, with good reason, because they are dangerous. You could tread on one at night, but their numbers don't seem to be greatly affected by this. I mean, there's some debate about whether humanity has an effect on snake numbers, and they do if you know the concentration of humanity is very dense. As I mentioned earlier, you know, I mean, down in central Nairobi, you're not going to find any snakes at all. There just aren't any there. There's nowhere for them to live. In rural areas in Kenya, you know, really big snakes have disappeared. You know, pythons, big cobras, they tend not to be tolerated around, you know, our homes and houses and things like that, because they're basically where big people spot them. They think that thing's dangerous. I better kill it. So, you know, dangerous snakes and humanity are to a large extent incompatible. And in some ways, this is why we need protected areas. You know, the government can't say to residents of Nairobi, we'd like you to tolerate the spitting cobras in your garden because they're useful. You know, no one's going to accept that. So best practice is, you know, have open spaces like City Park, Arboretum, okay, Gong Forest, Nairobi National Park. Protect the snakes in those areas. Tolerate them in urban areas. I mean, in urban areas of Nairobi, there's still plenty of small harmless snakes, you know, house snakes, white-lipped snakes, wolf snakes, green snakes, things like that. But, you know, I hate to say it, but, you know, dangerous snakes and humanity are essentially incompatible.
That's great. And his last question, it's sad that most people share photos of only dead snakes for identification in social media. What can be done to prevent these killings and promote sharing of live photos?
Well, it's, you know, it's the usual thing. It's education. You know, I mean, if someone comes to your school, you know, and says, you know, I'm going to show you some snakes, here's some pictures of snakes, here's some harmless snakes and things like that, and people get to know them, then they'll tolerate them. And I mean, this is the stuff you guys do. We do it on our Facebook page, the National Museum do it, KWS do it. They basically say, look, you know, not all snakes are bad. Here's a good way of recognizing them and things like that. Education, attitude of tolerance. But in the end, I mean, you know, some people, you know, you can work really hard at it, and you can educate as many people as you can, but in the end, some people are never going to tolerate snakes. And also some people can't tell them apart. And I mean, this may sound a bit strange, but I mean, I know very good herpetologists who can't identify snakes. And I mean, a friend of mine is a good herpetologist once sent me a picture of a snake he'd seen in the Serengeti and said, oh, I've seen this snake. I think it's a Philothamnus, which is a green snake, a harmless green snake. And in fact, the picture was of a velvety green night adder, which is in fact dangerous, or not very dangerous. So some people can't tell them apart, just like some people look at two cars and they can't tell the difference between an Audi and a BMW or something like that, or a Toyota Land Cruiser and a Land Rover. And some people can and some people can't, just like some people can't tell the difference between, different species of weaver bird. So, education is a way forward. You do what you can, and, basically things are going to get better. But in the end, some people are never going to like snakes, and some people are never going to be able to identify them.
Thank you very much for that. To our Facebook page, I see a question from Sam Gushu Ngugi. Hi, Stephen. A bit late to the party, but enjoying what I have caught so far. I'm not sure if you've spoken on this already, but could you say something about snake repellent and the venom rocks again? Do they work or are pure scams? I think this you had elaborated before, and maybe just for the interest of time, I will urge some maybe later on to visit our YouTube channel, because we'll upload the presentation, because this was well handled initially.
Yeah, I would actually like to say something about that, Richard. I mean, particularly snake repellents. I mean, no, it's a stunt. I mean, snakes are eukaryotes, okay? They're advanced multicellular vertebrates. Anything that repels a snake will repel us. Now, you hear these legends, in shops in Nairobi, you can buy a snake repellent. And some people will tell you in the countryside, oh, you must burn tires, or you must put down old engine oil around your compound. And I hate to say it, none of these repel snakes, or anything that does repel snakes, anything that's really toxic enough to repel a snake can also damage us humans. This stuff is not good for us. Some people say you should grow certain plants. It doesn't work. I hate to say it. There is nothing that repels snakes that won't, or repels or damages snakes that won't repel or damage us. So no, there are no effective snake repellents. You want to keep snakes away from your house. There are certain things you could do. Try and close the house, so there are no gaps under the door. Fit gauze on the windows. If you can't do that when you're sleeping at night, check that you try to sleep on a bed. Have a tucked-in mosquito net and things like that. Keep the area near the house clear. I mean, often if you've got water outside, snakes will come for water. So if you've got a dripping tap, you've got to be careful. And also if you keep stock outside, I mean, some people have chickens outside and things like that, and the snake will come for the chickens. So you've basically got to try and, protect yourself. But there are no, I must emphasize this, there are no effective snake repellents.
Okay, thank you for that. Another comment from Jay Amisi from our Facebook page. This is a very interesting and educational session. I would wish to propose that Iucn should work on offering a low-cost educational session in order to get more people in snake conservation. And well, there's another question from Amina Sabel. It's quite a long question, and it's actually a question that I had put on hold initially because she was still trying to come on board. Now that she's here, I think it's a high time that we look at them. So Amina is from Wasini Island in Shimoni area, the coastal part of Kenya. The question is, what is known about the home range of snakes? Is there a pattern relating to certain families, or is this characteristic rather genera or even species specific?
Yeah, good question. Yep, some snakes do have home ranges. They're not territorial. I mean, a snake, for example, a black mamba won't have an area where it defends and it drives away other black mambas or anything like that. But they do have home ranges. The bigger the snake, the larger the home range may be. For example, there have been some studies in southern Africa with cobras, and they found some of them had quite large home ranges. But having said that, they didn't stick to them all the time. Sometimes they'd move, but they do have a home range. Often it's several sort of hectares or even larger. And I mean, in India, studies of the king cobra found they had very large home ranges. And the interesting thing also is that they know where they are within that range. A man who was studying snakes in Australia, he was studying a snake called a red-bellied black snake. He found that the snake had a home range of about, I think, a square kilometre. And if the snake had gone out and it was disturbed, it could return home without having to follow its original route. So it knew where it was in space. So yeah, they do have home ranges. The bigger the snake, the larger the home range. They also often have semi-permanent homes. I mean, many years ago, I was working in Tharaka, down on the eastern side of Mount Kenya. We used to find black mambas there. And black mamba would live in a particular spot for several months at a time, but then it would move on. And they used to live in the, the beehives that they hang in the trees. Sometimes a black mamba would live in a beehive and it would stay there for 2 or 3 months, but then it would go. It would move on. And then sometimes it would come back, or the black mamba would be living in a sort of rock crack or something like that. And they stay there for a while and then move away. But yeah, they do have homes. They do have home ranges. And this is one of the problems. Occasionally you get these schemes where people think, okay, we're doing development here. We will translocate the snakes or other problem animals. And I think without exception, these schemes have never worked because the snakes then try and make their way home. Yeah. And in doing so, they have to cross unfamiliar territory. And it can be very dangerous. They do silly things like sleeping in the open. I mean, you may remember, I'm not talking about snakes here, but back in the 1960s and 1970s, there was a scheme in Kenya to trap leopards, especially up around Mount Kenya and the Aberdares, that were causing problems on farms. And these leopards were trapped. And then they put a tracking collar on them and they released them in Savo. And most of them made their way back to Mount Kenya. And they went across country and they did so. Animals try to go back home. And
can I interrupt, Steve?
Yeah, go on.
Has there been, because this research with the home ranges, I'm very, and the snakes, obviously, I'm very curious how this looks practically. I mean, I read something in India that they tagged actually snakes to see whether they come back to when they have been relocated. And yeah, I heard that a lot of them came back. But now, for example, me, as we live with these eastern forest cobras, and then there are times we see them almost daily. Then there are other stretches, maybe a month, maybe even 2. We don't see one. I get all worried a bit what happened. And then they pop up again. So now I was wondering, how far do they go? And when a research has been done, maybe with cobras, have they been then tagged? Maybe was there research in South Africa or here in East Africa to find out what the home range is, or how do scientists assess? Are they actually able to assess a home range of a snake? I'm curious about that.
I don't think, I mean, that's a good question, but I don't think there's any sort of hard and fast data. People have made observations particularly with sort of big snakes like cobras and mambas. There was a guy who studied mambas in South Africa, and he found they often went some distance, several hundred meters away from their home, and came back. So although they didn't have, it's not like with tracking elephants where they've actually produced maps showing where they go. That hasn't been done with most snakes. There was a bit of stuff in South Africa with puff adders where they found they often traveled 30, 40, sometimes even 100 meters away from a particular base. They did move around a bit. Nothing formal has been done with the big elapid snakes in Africa, the mambas and the cobras. But having said that, I mean, I know from my personal experience, I mean, snakes will travel 100, 150 meters away from home in any direction they feel safe, and they get to know the landscape. The reason that, for example, you're not seeing the snakes is that they are there, but they are just very, very secretive. They're extremely good at hiding themselves. And one of the things that emerged in South Africa when they were radio tracking these puff adders, they'd put chips in them so they knew where they were.
Okay.
Often they would work out where the puff adder was, and the receiver was telling them that they were within a meter of the snake and they could not see it. It was that well camouflaged. I mean, a snake can be in your house and you just don't see it. They're around, they're secretive. So yeah, but I think cobras will travel, several hundred meters away from home, and then they tend to come back to a regular refuge.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for for answering Amina's question. And thank you very much, Amina, for coming in and also raising the questions. There's a question from James Ntopai. Do we have lizards that are endemic to Kenya only?
Sorry, you broke up there. Can you say that again, Richard?
Okay, James is asking, do we have lizards that are endemic to Kenya only?
Yeah, loads of them. And in fact, there's been a recent paper just published by Dr. Patrick Malonza at the NMK, and he has described 6 new species of gecko, all of which are endemic to Kenya. So yeah, there's quite a lot. There's a number of chameleons. I can't remember off the top of my head how many it is. I think 6 or 7 species that are only found in Kenya. So we've got chameleons that are endemic to Kenya. We've got geckos that are endemic to Kenya. We've got agamas and skinks that are endemic. Yep, there's a lot of them. I think more than 30 species. Not so many snakes that are endemic, but we do have some real high-class snakes that are endemic to Kenya. For example, the Mount Kenya bush viper, the Kenya montane viper, Kenya horn viper, only found in Kenya. Yep. And Kenya's got a quite unique landscape, as you ladies and gentlemen know. I mean, we've got the semi-desert, the near desert, we've got the mountains, we've got the coast, we've got the forest in the west. We've got the most diverse herpetofauna in Africa, and a fair number of endemics, mostly associated with the highlands, okay, but not entirely. For example, I mean, Patrick Malonza described a gecko from Savo, called it Ligonectulus savoensis. And as far as we know, that's so far endemic to Kenya. Now, it's a sort of gecko that probably occurs in northern Tanzania. You know, the ecosystem, the eastern Kenya dry savanna ecosystem extends into northern Tanzania. So it'll probably extend there. But yeah, we've got a fair number of endemics, chameleons in particular, chameleons, geckos, some agamas.
Okay. Thank you. From Robin James, thanks for a great talk, Steve. One question. All the literature seems to suggest that night adders ought to be fairly abundant in the region. However, I have failed to see any, and they seem to rarely crop up on the East African Reptiles Facebook group. Is it possible that they are silently vanishing, perhaps due to collapsing amphibian population?
That's possible, but what is much more likely, I think, with night adders, of course, is that they look quite dangerous and they're active both by night and by day, and consequently they're not tolerated. Okay. Now, in the old days, I mean, I lived in several places in Nairobi. You know, I lived in Lavington. I lived in on the Nairobi Hill. I never found a night adder within the city, but you can find them out to the east. I mean, Ruiru, Thika, Kenyatta College. You used to be able to go out there and hunt them, and you could find them. They're also in Nairobi National Park, but I mean, an old friend of mine lives in Kitengela, just on the south side of the park, and he says he hardly ever sees night adders. But we did see one once when we were driving from Kitengela down to Athi River, you know, that road that goes along the bottom side of the park. We did see a night adder down there. So they're around, but yeah, and sometimes I see pictures on our Facebook page of night adders in Nairobi National Park, but they are pretty infrequent. And I suspect, I mean, it's a sharp question. They, as Robin mentioned, they eat amphibians. Now, quite a lot of amphibians are very tolerant of polluted water. And I mean, in the heart of Nairobi, we all know we had those nights where the toads are out there going bark, 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 and we have a terrible night's sleep. So, you know, amphibians are quite tolerant in Nairobi. There's a fair number. I suspect it's much more to do with the fact that, you know, basically night adders are fairly big. They're active by day. People see them and think, well, that looks dangerous, I better kill it. So basically they're not existing well in populated areas.
Thank you. There's another question from Alois Gaffey. Hello, a myth about using crude oil when you pour around the compound and that snakes don't go over. Is that myth true?
No, it's not. I mean, snakes don't like crude oil any more than we do. You know, I mean, you wouldn't crawl over crude oil, but on the other hand, it doesn't repel them or anything like that. And of course, pouring crude oil in your garden or something is going to do a lot of chemical damage. It's going to damage your plant. It's going to damage your environment. You're going to get that terrible hydrocarbon stink, and it's not going to go away. You know what it's like when you get near a petrol station where diesel has been spilled and so on. You can smell it from many meters away. Crude oil doesn't deter snakes, just spoils the environment. There are, as I said earlier, there are no snake repellents basically.
Okay, there's another question from Amina. Boomslang, common tiger snake, mopane snake, snouted night adder, East African shovel snout, ashes spitting cobra. All these have been spotted just opposite of Wasini Island in the Shimoni area. But we haven't encountered any of those species. Did we just miss them?
Well,
if these species are indeed absent from the island, what could be the reason considering the comparability of the habitat and the closeness of the locations?
A very interesting question. In general, islands tend to have a sort of impoverished or slightly poorer, fauna than the nearby mainland, just because things find it hard to get there. An island like Wasini, for example, probably in the past, water levels have risen to the extent that the island was underwater. Okay, as you know, it's based on coral rag. Water levels have sunk. Snakes had to recolonize the island, and the things that can get there are basically the things that can swim. If you look on the islands off the East African coast, most of them, for example, have got green mambas, and that is because it's a big snake and it can swim quite well. Black mambas as well and things like that as well, but they don't have that many burrowing snakes. And it's because in the past, the island was submerged. The island's then been recolonized, but some of the things just haven't managed to get there. And occasionally you'll get things like, for example, a snake will be picked up by a bird and then dropped or something like that, or a snake rafts across on a bit of wood or a bundle of vegetation. But islands, islands, they're small, the habitat's small. There's a smaller range of prey. And often, as I said, they've had to be recolonized. And that is why islands have impoverished fauna. I mean, for example, you take Zanzibar. On Zanzibar, you get quite a wide range of snakes, but you don't get any puff adders. And that's because in the past, obviously, the island was submerged. Since then, it's emerged from under the water. And snakes have got across, but the snakes that have got across are those that can swim. Puff adders can swim, but they can't swim very well. So basically, they never got back onto the island.
Puff adders we do have.
Yeah. On Wasini, all right. Uh-huh.
Yeah.
That's interesting. Mind you, it's not that great a distance from Wasini to the mainland.
No, it's not comparable to Zanzibar.
Yeah.
Okay,
thank you so much.
Well, it's a pleasure.
Okay, thank you very much for the interactive session. Ladies and gentlemen, we are really running short of time, and I thank each and every one of you for participating. Maybe for the questions that we have not been able to go through, or if you feel that you still have any question that you want to interact with Steve, maybe I will kindly request Steve, if you could share your contacts so that our audiences can also reach to you directly if they wish to.
Sure. Let me put it in the chat box now. Yes. Okay, I'll put this is my email is still.
Yeah, just put it in the chat box, and because I see many questions are still flocking in, but time is really not on our side. We are 15 minutes ahead of our timings. But,
okay.
Thank you each and every one of you for joining us for our today's question and answer session. And I might say it has really been very insightful. Thank you very much, Steve, for also accepting our request to come and answer our questions about reptiles. We really thank you for that.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me, Richard. It's a pleasure to be with you all, and I hope we'll do so again in the future, and hope to bump into you sometime in Kenya.
Thank you very much. It has really been very interesting. So you will just share your email in the
It's
chat
been a
box.
pleasure. I just put it there. Can you see it?
Yeah.
Hang on. Let me a second. Let me say to everyone. Hang on, everyone in meeting. Sorry, I think I just went to Amina. To everyone. So it's Steve Spawls at hotmail.com. Right. I hope you can all see that, ladies and gentlemen. And then also I'll put I'm also going to put here the website address, www.reptileatlas.com. So if you go there and go to downloads, you can find information on all of Kenya's dangerous snakes. Download the individual files; they're all free.
Thank you very much. We have got the details, the email address, and the website. So if you would like to further engage Steve, you can reach him through the email address that he has provided. So ladies and gentlemen, this brings us to the end of our interactive session today, our question and answer session that was about reptiles. And see you next month for another interactive session. Thank you very much and have a great day ahead.
Thank you.
We can leave at our own pleasure.